The moment the CEO's son smiled and called me outdated, I knew my seat was already gone. "I think this company needs a fresh wind," Damien said, leaning forward with practiced ease. "Something younger, faster, less attached to things that are slowly fading." No one interrupted him. I had been chief operating officer for 15 years. I had built the operational backbone that carried a $5 billion enterprise through acquisitions, regulatory storms, and more than one near collapse. Yet in that room, my history felt strangely irrelevant. Damien continued, voice smooth, confident. "Innovation doesn't wait," respectfully. "Some leadership styles belong to another era." A few board members nodded, not aggressively, carefully, as if they had rehearsed restraint. I glanced toward Nicholas, his father, the CEO. He studied the table instead of my face. "I'll be the fresh wind," Damien added, smiling wider. "I can take this company where it needs to go next." That was when I spoke. With that much confidence, I said evenly, "There's no reason to say no." The relief in the room was immediate. Someone exhaled. Someone else shifted in their chair. They thought I had surrendered. Damien looked pleased. "I appreciate your openness, Marjane." I nodded once. "I appreciate clarity." The board chair cleared her throat. "Then we're aligned on the transition framework." Aligned. Such a clean word for displacement. I watched hands move. Notes were taken. No vote was called. No debate invited. This was not a discussion. It was a performance. And Damien had already been cast. As the meeting adjourned, a director brushed past me and whispered. They wanted it to look cooperative. I gathered my papers slowly. I wanted them to see that my hands were steady. They mistook composure for consent. What they didn't understand was that I was listening, not agreeing. And once you understand how a decision was made, you also understand how it will unravel. The story you are about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at RevengeAITA. While inspired by common workplace power struggles and corporate dynamics, all characters, companies, and events are fictional. This narrative is meant to explore themes of dignity, accountability, and quiet resilience, reminding us that true authority is earned through responsibility, not inherited through titles. Why do powerful people feel safer when you appear to accept your own erasure? The hallway outside the boardroom felt quieter than it should have. Conversations restarted in low, careful tones, the kind people use when they believe the outcome is settled. Nicholas walked beside me for a few steps. Not once did he look in my direction. "Good meeting," he said to no one in particular. I stopped walking. "If you're going to pretend this was spontaneous," I said, "at least have the decency to look at me while you do it." He hesitated, then turned. His smile was thin. "This isn't personal, Marjane. It never is," I replied, "until it is." He glanced down the corridor, checking who might be close enough to hear. The board wants continuity without turbulence. Damien fits the narrative they need right now. Narrative, I repeated, not capability. His jaw tightened. "We're under pressure. So am I said. "The difference is, I don't confuse pressure with permission." He said nothing. Then he nodded once and walked away. I gathered my bag and headed toward my office. Halfway there, someone fell into step beside me. Ellen Rhodes, one of the independent directors. She had joined the board 2 years earlier. A former operations executive who still understood how real companies worked. They wanted it to look cooperative, she said quietly. I didn't slow down. "How long has this been decided?" She exhaled. "Since the investor dinner in New York. Damien convinced them the company needed a generational reset. And I voted to delay," she said. That didn't last long. We stopped outside my door. She lowered her voice further. "They want a clean transition story. No conflict, no internal dissent." "I noticed," I said. Her eyes held mine. "Be careful. If you push back publicly, they'll frame it as resistance to change." "I've never resisted change," I said. "I resist incompetence." A faint smile crossed her face, then disappeared. That distinction doesn't photograph well. After she left, I sat at my desk and opened my calendar. Meetings were already being reassigned, committees renamed, access permissions adjusted with quiet efficiency. This had not been a reaction, it had been preparation, and they believed my silence meant agreement. How do you remove someone indispensable without admitting they are indispensable? The call came the next morning, not from Nicholas, Not from Damien, from human resources. Marjane, said a calm voice I barely recognized. This isn't disciplinary. We want to be very clear about that. Then be clear, I replied. Why am I on this call instead of in my meetings? There was a pause. The sound of papers being aligned. The board believes a short step back would support organizational stability during the transition. Stability, I repeated. That word seems popular this week. It's about future readiness, she continued, unfazed. The company is entering a new phase. I built the systems that made that phase possible. I said, you're not worried about readiness. You're worried about optics. Another pause. This one longer. You'll be placed on temporary leave, she said carefully, with full compensation. This protects everyone except me, I said. Later that afternoon, I joined a video call with 2 board members and Nicholas. Damien was not present, which told me everything I needed to know. We want to avoid unnecessary noise, said Charles Myers, a longtime investor representative. Markets are sensitive right now. Your investors already heard Damien's version, I said. This is about keeping the story clean. Nicholas finally spoke. Marjane, this isn't a removal. It's a pause. A pause with my access revoked, I said. My committees reassigned. My calendar wiped. Charles leaned forward. You're still valued. But Damien has momentum with the investment community. They see him as the future. I see. I said. So I'm the past. No one said that, Nicholas replied quickly. You didn't have to, I said. Your silence did the work. The call ended without resolution. No argument, no apology. Just decisions framed as care. That evening, I received a media briefing draft from communications. It described a seamless leadership evolution and praised my legacy contributions. I closed the file without responding. Temporary, they called it. What survives when titles disappear, but responsibility does not. I joined the company when it was still arguing with itself about what it wanted to be. Nicholas hired me after a meeting that ended with him saying, I don't need another presenter. I need someone who can make this thing stop breaking. On my first week, a senior manager waved a deck at me and said, This explains the workflow. It explains how you wish it worked. I said, Show me the logs. He frowned. We don't keep them that clean. We will, I replied, or we'll never know why things fail. That was how it started. I didn't redesign titles or branding. I redesigned consequences. Every change left a trace. Every approval required a second set of eyes. Every shortcut came with a written risk that someone had to sign their name to. A year later, a client threatened to walk after a routing failure cost them a week of production. Their operations director flew in furious. I don't want promises, she said across the table. I want to know who owns this. I do, I told her. And here is how we prevent it from happening again. She studied the audit trail I put in front of her, then the compliance checklist. If I call you at midnight, will you answer? Yes, I said, and I'll know where to look. They renewed for 5 years. Those conversations repeated themselves. Different cities, different executives, same ending. Trust built not on charm, but on proof. When Damien started talking about acceleration and disruption, he never mentioned the controls underneath. He didn't know the names of the safeguards because he had never needed them. I wasn't proud of my title. I was proud of the fact that when something went wrong, there was always a record of why. As I sat alone that evening, reviewing access changes already made in my absence, one truth settled quietly and firmly. A system doesn't forget who built it. How much damage can confidence cause when it replaces caution? I found out Damien had begun accelerating deployments when my phone rang after midnight. It was Lena Ortiz, our compliance manager. She never called that late unless something was wrong. He moved the release window up, she said, skipping pleasantries. Cut 2 testing stages. Which ones? I asked. Regression and load verification. I closed my eyes. Who approved it? There was a pause. He did. The next morning, Damien sent a company-wide update, proud to announce faster cycles. He wrote, We're removing unnecessary friction. An hour later, an investor note circulated praising his decisiveness. The language sounded familiar. I opened the attachment. It was a summary of throughput gains I had completed 3 weeks earlier. Back when my access still worked, the charts were mine. The conclusions were mine. Only the signature had changed. I forwarded it to Damien. These optimizations were already in place. He replied within minutes. Yes, but I packaged them for impact. Lena stopped by my office later that day. She stood in the doorway, not sitting. He wants me to sign off retroactively, she said. Says it's just procedural. It isn't, I said. If you sign, you own the risk. She swallowed. He implied my team was slowing the company down. That's how pressure works. I said, it pretends urgency is courage. By the end of the week, the first warning appeared. A minor routing delay, then a reconciliation mismatch that corrected itself after a restart. Small things. Easy to dismiss. Damien dismissed them loudly. Legacy noise, he said in a meeting I joined remotely. We're moving past it. I spoke once. Those checks exist because they catch patterns before they cascade. He smiled at the screen. Respectfully, Marjane. Speed is the pattern now. No one challenged him. Not publicly. That evening, Lena emailed me the approval trail. It showed gaps where signatures should have been, timestamps compressed beyond policy. She added one line at the bottom, I did not sign. I saved the file and labeled it carefully. When confidence starts replacing caution, it leaves fingerprints. Why do organizations ignore warnings until they become headlines? The first real break didn't make the news. It barely made the internal dashboard. A distribution sync failed just after dawn, freezing orders for 11 minutes. The system recovered on its own, but only because a fallback module I had designed years earlier rerouted traffic before the queue overloaded. Damien called it a win. In the afternoon leadership call, he smiled and said, "We hit turbulence and adjusted in real time. That's agility." Several executives nodded. I spoke calmly. The fallback triggered because a validation layer was bypassed. That layer was removed last week. Damien waved it off. Legacy redundancy. We're proving we don't need it. After the call, an internal memo went out praising his decisive leadership under pressure. The language was generous. It also rewrote cause and effect. I spent the next hour documenting what had happened. I attached logs, timestamps, and the approval trail showing which controls had been skipped. I submitted it through the governance channel we had built for exactly this reason. The response came the next morning from Operations Strategy. Thank you for your input. At this stage, leadership is aligned on moving forward. Aligned. Again. Later that day, Nicholas stopped by my office. He didn't sit. They think you're pushing back because you're hurt, he said. I'm pushing back because the system is being stressed beyond design, I replied. Those controls exist for a reason, he sighed. Damien needs room to lead. Leadership doesn't require removing safeguards, I said. It requires understanding them. Nicholas looked tired. Let's not turn this into a standoff, I nodded. Then don't frame evidence as resistance. He left without responding. That evening, Lena forwarded me a screenshot of the internal praise email. At the bottom, she added a note. They called this success. I archived the message alongside my report. Every warning was now timestamped, routed, and acknowledged. The record was growing, even if the room stayed quiet. When systems fail, who pays for the decisions made at the top? The outage began before sunrise and spread faster than the alerts could keep up. Orders stalled. Tracking froze. Client support lines flooded within minutes. Damien called an emergency briefing. This is exactly what happens when you rely on legacy architecture, he said, voice sharp with certainty. We inherited fragility. I unmuted. The failure occurred in the new routing layer added last week. The legacy safeguards were bypassed. He didn't look at the data I shared. Those safeguards slowed us down. This proves my point. Within an hour, clients were on the line. One operations director spoke without preamble. We missed shipments across 3 facilities. Who owns this? Damien answered before anyone else could. We're correcting issues rooted in old design choices. The word old landed where it was meant to. That afternoon, the board convened without me. I was informed afterward by email. To reduce confusion during remediation, it read, Marjane will remain distanced from day-to-day operations. I called Nicholas immediately. You know that's not accurate. He exhaled. They need a clean message. A clean message that points away from the decision-maker, I said, and toward me. Your absence created uncertainty, he replied, not meeting my eyes when we spoke in person. That's how they're framing it. I submitted warnings. I said, they were acknowledged. He nodded once. Acknowledged isn't the same as followed. The next client call was colder. We were told this disruption stemmed from legacy processes. A procurement lead said, "Is that true?" I chose my words carefully. The system performed exactly as designed until new changes removed critical checks. There was a pause. Then why are we hearing your name attached to the failure? Because it was useful, I thought. Because it redirected blame without admitting error. By evening, my access was fully revoked. My calendar emptied. My inbox fell silent. The company had erased my role, but not my shadow. What does loyalty cost when it's demanded instead of earned? Nicholas asked me to meet him after hours. He didn't call it a meeting. He said he needed a favor. "I want you back," he said as soon as we sat down. Not officially, just long enough to stabilize things. Stabilize, I repeated. "You mean fix what your son broke?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Damien is under extraordinary pressure. The board is nervous. Clients are restless. If you step in quietly, we can get through this." Quietly, I said, without a title, without authority, without accountability. "You don't need any of that," he replied. "You just need to help." I watched his hands as he spoke. They were shaking. "You're asking me to do the work while he keeps the credit," I said. "And when it works, he's the visionary. When it fails, I'm the legacy problem." He didn't deny it. "This isn't about credit, it's about the company." "It stopped being about the company when truth became inconvenient," I said. Nicholas rubbed his forehead. "If this blows up publicly, it will destroy him." "He is not a child," I said. "He chose to lead. He's my son," Nicholas said, finally meeting my eyes. "And you're the only one who can prevent lasting damage." I let the silence sit between us. "You taught me that accountability is the foundation of any system," I said. "You said shortcuts always surface. Now you want me to bury the evidence so he can survive the consequences." "That's not fair," he said. "It's precise," I replied. "You're asking for invisible labor, for loyalty without recognition, for silence in exchange for proximity." Nicholas stood. "If you walk away now, everything we built together will fracture." I rose as well. "What we built depended on integrity. I won't trade that for access." He looked older when I left. I walked out knowing exactly what my refusal would cost them. What happens when reality stops cooperating with appearances? The first call came from a client Damien trusted to stay quiet. "We're freezing the deployment," the operations director said. "Until Marjane signs off?" "I'm not in that role anymore," I replied. There was a pause. "Then we freeze." By the end of the week, 3 more followed. Different industries, same message. No escalation, no threats, just refusal. Inside the company, the exits began to whisper before they spoke. Daniel Cho, one of the senior engineers, left his badge on my desk. He didn't send a goodbye email. "I can't keep approving things I know are unsafe," he said when I called him. "This isn't engineering anymore, it's theater." 2 others resigned within days. Quietly, no announcements. Their absence did more damage than any headline could. The board finally requested a full audit review. Not because they wanted truth, but because they needed an explanation that held. The audit trails did their job. Approval chains compressed beyond policy. Compliance signatures missing. Emergency overrides stacked without justification. Each shortcut dated. Each decision owned. Damien sat through the review without interrupting. When he spoke, his voice sounded different. "We were moving fast," he said. "The market demanded it." A board member leaned forward. "The market did not demand that you bypass internal controls." Another added. "Clients demanded oversight. You removed it." No one mentioned my name. They didn't need to. The record spoke clearly without me. Later, Nicholas called. "They're restructuring leadership responsibilities," he said. "They want you involved again." "Involved how?" I asked. "As a consultant, transitional authority. Authority without accountability," I said. "That's not involvement," he sighed. "Damien doesn't have the room he thought he did." "He spent it," I replied. "Confidence is easy to burn." The next morning, the investor briefing shifted tone, less vision, more caution. Damien's updates grew shorter, fewer promises, fewer smiles. Trust did not collapse loudly. It withdrew. And when it did, there was nothing left to perform with. Do you really lose something if it cannot function without you? The board didn't ask me to return to my old title. They offered something safer. Advisory authority, Charles said, sliding a document across the table. Limited scope, clear boundaries. I didn't touch the paper. You're asking me to stabilize what you chose not to protect. Nicholas looked at me with tired eyes. The company will survive, he said. Smaller, more cautious. I know, I replied. Survival was never the issue. Damien wasn't in the room. He hadn't been for weeks. His name still appeared on org charts, but decisions no longer passed through him. That was how his influence ended. Not with a scandal. With absence. I declined the offer. Instead, I met with the people who had quietly reached out while everything was shaking. Engineers who wanted to build without shortcuts. Compliance leads who refused to sign lies. Clients who said the same thing, again and again. We trust how you work. One of them told me, not where you sit. The company recalibrated without me. Contracts were revised. Ambitions narrowed. The $5 billion narrative softened into something more modest and more honest. What I carried away wasn't confidential data or leverage. It was alignment. The systems I built lived on in principle, even when rewritten elsewhere. The people who mattered followed clarity, not logos. Nicholas called one last time. I wish I'd handled it differently, he said. So do I replied. But wishing doesn't repair foundations. He didn't argue. When I started again, it wasn't with a launch announcement or a press release. Just a small team, clean rules, and the same discipline I had always believed in. Reliability before speed. Accountability before praise. The lesson I took with me was simple and costly. Confidence can open doors, but only integrity keeps them standing. Titles fade, narratives change. What endures is the work that holds when no one is watching.